This is the Little Moments Count radio podcast, created in partnership with community radio stations throughout Minnesota. Each episode, you'll hear interviews with early childhood experts on how to support the important brain development that takes place in the first 1,000 days of life, just through little moments every day. Learn more at littlemomentscount.org/podcast. Welcome back to So St. Paul, a show that is all about our favorite city, our capital city, St. Paul, Minnesota, and the people and the things that are surrounding our city and in our city that make it so great. So St. Paul airs right here on WFNU LP 94.1 FM. It's Frogtown Community Radio. You can also hear us on WFNU.org and on WFNU's own smartphone app. Just search Frogtown Radio in your phone's app store. I'm your host, Katie DeSelle, and I'm very excited today to talk to a fantastic power couple, Samantha and Kyle. This episode of So St. Paul is presented in partnership with Minnesota Public Radio and Little Moments Count. Little Moments Count is a statewide collaborative focused on helping parents and caregivers learn about the importance of brain development in the first 3 years of life. Nearly 80% of brain growth happens in the first 1,000 days, and small moments of interaction like talking, playing, reading, and singing help create the pathways that build a child's brain during this early stage of life. More information is available at littlemomentscount.org. Parenting isn't a solo journey. It takes a village, as the saying goes. But how do we build that village in today's world? And how do we, as parents, prioritize our own well-being so we can be the best we can be for our little ones? Today we have the perfect guests to tackle these vital questions. Kyle and Samantha. They are a power couple. They are parents, peer support specialists, and advocates for strong families. Kyle VanBlaircom is a father of 3 and advocate for recovery and mental health, using his experiences to guide others through his role as a peer support specialist. He has 3 children, ages 13, 5, and 3, who have taught him valuable lessons in patience and love. Kyle has co-founded a nonprofit organization to provide recovery housing and support for those struggling with substance and mental health challenges. Samantha Bush is another dedicated advocate. She's a full-time student, a peer support specialist, and intern at a treatment facility focusing on empowering families and individuals in needs. Both Kyle and Samantha balance their personal and professional responsibilities to create a nurturing environment for their children and make a meaningful impact in their communities. Welcome, Kyle and Samantha. Thank you for being here.
So I'm Sam. I am from Osceola, Wisconsin, but I've moved here to River Falls. I have a 13-year-old, and that is Kyle's bonus daughter. I have her about 50% of the time, maybe a little less. I have a 5-year-old and a soon-to-be 3-year-old.
We have to keep checking the calendar.
Yeah, it's coming up. Her birthday is. I've gone through spurts of being a stay-at-home mom, a nursing mom, so like the full-time job of doing that. I was a mom at 22 compared to being a new mom again. I like to say new mom again just because being a mom when you're 22 compared to being a mom at 34, 35, it's a lot different. I work 2 jobs now. I go to school full time. I'm currently interning right now, and all the rest of my spare time is pretty much dedicated to my kids.
With the kids. Yep.
Yeah.
And if you would have asked me 5 years ago, before my son was born, if I had any interest in being a father, I would have told you no. It wasn't on my radar. You know, obviously that changes when you go through even the pregnancy, you know, just like the realization that this is like your little person that you made. And then he was born and I fell in love. And for me, it's trying to do things differently. You know, you have kind of that generational thing, and I catch myself a lot. I'm like, oh, there it is, you know, and you catch yourself doing and saying the same things as your parents. Not that they did a bad job, but, you know, you go through it yourself and you're like, I think I'm going to do things differently. And so you make a conscious effort towards that. But my son was born, fell in love. I'm so I fell right into the father role, I would say. It was a learning curve. I thank God we had all these supports in our lives, because I didn't know in a lot of ways what I was getting myself into. But
Yeah, it's very much every developmental stage comes with its new challenges and its new blessings and opportunities, right? Like, and I like how you mentioned like the retraining yourself to do things differently. And you're constantly reminding yourself, and like, really, it's not about teaching them to like take deep breaths. You're almost teaching yourself to take deep breaths, and just hoping that they can look at you and learn from you as the parent, like, okay, this is how I self-regulate. Because if I'm all out of regulation and I'm, flipping my top, as they say, then
crashing out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kyle, you mentioned like you're parenting different than maybe you were parented.
Yeah.
And what that looks like. And also, to add to that, how do you deregulate? Like, what are the steps that you take if a parent is overwhelmed? What have you guys found have worked best?
Yeah. So when I say doing things differently, the big thing that comes to mind is being consistent for my kids. Kind of tying that into regulating. I feel like there wasn't a lot of that in my house growing up. There was a lot of chaos. There was a lot of conflict. So just being that consistent person, and also being able to like put feelings, like names to feelings. I don't know if that was just not talked about a lot in our house, but this idea that we're as men allowed to have those emotions, and that's okay. And it's normal, and we don't have to like stuff that. So we have a lot of conversations about, feelings. And for me, being able to regulate as a parent, it's so important. We have a lot of stuff going on, and sometimes I don't always give myself like that grace or that credit, but when you're tired, you sleep. When you if you're stressed out, say that. Like, sometimes there's power in just like acknowledging that and saying like, you know what, I can restart my day from this moment forward. Like, I might have woke up in a bad mood, but I don't have to this doesn't have to turn into a bad day or a bad week. And also like self-care, like we got the kids at the grandparents' house tonight, and we're going to go out on a date, and we're taking time to do that. And it's not like as much as we probably should, but just taking those moments and focusing on ourselves and on each other, I think, is really important.
Are there things that you've learned along the way parenting, like that work better than other things? Things you've done where you're like, oh, I'm not going to do that again, or things you've done where you're like, oh, this definitely works for us? This
question actually reminds me of, the difference of parenting when you're 23. And I'm not saying all 23, 22-year-olds have it figured out, but I definitely didn't. I was more of a selfish, probably more selfish and like self-absorbed, like thinking of myself and putting my own needs first when I parented her. Like, I was still growing up, and I still had like a teenage mindset, and I'd get so frustrated so easily, and I'd like to say too that I didn't really have a lot of help. I didn't have like a village, I was dependent on myself to learn how to parent. Now I have a village. Now, like, I have people I can reach out to and talk to if I'm feeling overwhelmed or disconnected. Other people can recognize that too in me if I'm not saying anything. I think that's probably like the biggest difference, is like having support and maturity. Like, growing up, I've learned too, my kids respond so much better to like being gentle and like listening, and like really, they all have their own little love languages. Like, once you figure out what their love language is, you can kind of hone in on that and be like, okay, so like my son, his love language is 100% like quality time. Doing certain activities, whether it's playing Hot Wheels or, making up games with him to like color coordinate the Hot Wheels, whatever it is, like if you dedicate just a little bit of time with him every day to do that, he appreciates it. And my youngest, her love language is physical touch. When she's over-regulated and like feeling disconnected, all it really takes is going into the other room and laying down with her and, using that love language, like the physical touch to snuggle, to like get her back leveled out and calm down. Just paying attention to those things, like looking at what their needs are. And that's kind of what's different now. Now, my oldest, her love language is probably gifts. So taking her to Lululemon when I can afford it,
Nobody can afford that.
You mentioned the importance of having like a village to help raise children. You said the first time around when you were parenting, when you were younger, you didn't have that. How did you like find that village, or how do you come to these people that are your village?
Oh gosh, it's such an interesting story. It's super long, but I'll give you like the shortened version. So when we're in recovery, so our son, when he was about a year and a half old, he was removed for about 6 months from CPS, and neither of our families would step up to take him in. So he went into foster care. We got really close with the foster family, and we got really close with the foster mom's mom. We just maintained that relationship with them and used them as our village. We built this insane bond. Like, she's like my mom, she steps up in ways that my parents never have. So like something catastrophic and scary as like your child being removed, I think something really beautiful came out of it. Some really positive and supportive relationships.
In addition to them being in recovery, we have this unique opportunity to go to meetings and meet people there. And we got really involved with this organization called the Family Resource Center. So they would come out. I kind of compare them to like Mary Poppins. They like come out and they pull a bunch of stuff out of a bag and, do activities with our kids, which was really cool. But they, through that process, were super consistent, would come and check in on us every week. So I would say that's part of our community too, is, resources like that we've, were super helpful for me. You kind of knew all this stuff, but for me, I never felt, being a new parent, like I was asking a dumb question, which, believe it or not, I think is a big reason why people don't ask for help, is because you're supposed to know this stuff. You're supposed to be a dad. You're supposed to be all these things that we.
Yeah. And they provide so many like other outside resources too. Like you got to take Lennon and do a cooking class with her.
That was fun.
Like different ways that you can go out into the community and bond with other parents that also want other connections. Like I've done the baby and me classes and the play and learn classes, and there's just fast, like tons of things. We have somebody come out every other week, and they're like doing this thing where they'll cook with you and like teach you different ways to, I guess, what was it like?
I don't really know what the science is behind it, but like how to praise your kid without saying good job. It's like more, oh, I noticed that you did a really good job of stirring that pot. Like, and, they explain it, like why that's helpful. And I'm like, oh, okay, that makes sense. And then I forget like what we're actually doing. But, like it gives you different perspective, which is super helpful, because that's the other thing about parenting is you get so hyper-focused on what you're doing and how you're doing it. And nobody ever really tells you like, hey, have you ever tried this? So it's nice to have that like outside.
I want to add too that our the foster grandma, we just call her Mimi. She's a speech pathologist. So
that's helpful too.
Super helpful, but she works for the Washington Public Schools. So she's always like first to know if like something's where areas of improvement are, like, has different tips and tricks, and she understands what it's like to be overwhelmed and is always willing to step in and help with certain things. So we also get time to like be selfish sometimes and focus on our marriage and our relationship, because that's important too. That has to matter too.
That's amazing that you guys have that relationship with her. I don't know how common that is in foster situations.
From what I heard, it's not very common. So we recognize that that's not normal. And I think, but God, what a blessing that was, just to have that relationship. I mean, we're pretty lucky. And
we went from like being in court, you know, with these people to going on family vacations with them and spending Christmases.
I think it's hard in that moment to differentiate for people, like who's who and who's on your side and who's against you. And it's all very black and white when you're in that that mindset. And so when we realized that, you know, they're there to take care of our kids and they share the same like interests in our kids as us, then that really helped us. And I think that's when our outlook on the situation changed. We had to build trust.
Just being in that situation can be so challenging. That as a parent, you want to know that your kid's always going to love you first, always going to put you first, is going to miss you, is going to need you during those moments that they're not there. Yeah.
It's hard to see when you're in that, like, what good is going to come out of this, because your kids miss you, you miss your kids. And I mean, you're their parent at the end of the day. And then, you know, you see someone else kind of taking on that role. So it's very hard to navigate that. It's confusing. There's a lot of stigma involved in that too. I'm grateful we have the opportunity. And I know that not a lot of people have that. Maybe if that happened more, there would be better outcomes for those situations.
When your child was with the foster family, how did you like keep that hope? Or, you know, like, I feel like that would be a really easy time to like give up and just be like, there was somebody else. I mean, they're my child, but you know, like, what were the
stay sober?
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, that's such a good question, because
a lot of people don't.
And I don't blame them, because you're using it as a coping skill, right? It's a coping skill to other things going on. Yep. And you remove the most important thing in your life, your children, and you expect that person to not use that coping skill that's getting them through life on life's terms. And that's very traumatic. And many people continue using because you don't want to think about it. You don't want to feel the hurt. You don't want to be in pain.
You're like overwhelmed with shame, right? Because all these people with letters after their names are telling you that you're not a fit parent, you know, and so that hurts. And so a lot of people don't get out of that, and it's easy. And then you take away all the support. I mean, we didn't have our family, to be honest. The system isn't very supportive either. So like the cards are stacked against families in a lot of ways, and they sure were for us. And we fought like hell to get our kids back. And we were privileged enough to have an attorney to be able to show up for us. But that's another thing, is people don't get that. Like, we had to pay for that out of pocket. So a lot of people aren't equipped to even get an attorney. So you're kind of in this situation where we're removing your kids. You got to get sober. We're not really going to tell you what you need to do to make that happen. So figure it out, and good luck. And if you're lucky, you might get some visits in the process. And that was our experience. And luckily,
we had a lot of, you know, that wasn't the first time. Like, prior to that, we had some significant sober time. So we already had these tools, these coping skills, like
foundation.
So we had our sober community that we were able to like fall back to, and support us through that. Thank God. And then during that, we had each other. You know, we both knew that we needed to fight together, right? It was just, we didn't want a life without our kids. So like,
buckled down and did what we needed to do and got into treatment and started to rebuild.
Yeah, did all the things that were required of us. And a lot of people want to, you know, be bitter towards the foster families. You know, you almost feel like, gosh, these people are going to steal my kids away. But that wasn't the case. And I'm like, you know, if anything, you need to treat them with love and respect, because they're caring for the most important thing in your world. So why not be, you know, on very good terms with them? And their perception of like, you know, people that were addicts was like, you know, someone under the bridge with like
a brown paper bag or something.
So it helped them too, I think, identify, you know, not all, it's very stigmatized and not every situation's the same. So it was a learning experience for everybody.
Like you said, I know not all families who are struggling with addiction or losing their children are the same. But if you were to give advice to someone who, maybe just lost custody of their children and are trying to get them back, what are there resources that helped you, or what would you say to them?
Professionally, we both support people that are navigating these systems now. Take advantage of every single resource they offer you. Some communities have less resources available to people, but Family Resource Center, that was great. Learning as much as you can about like protective factors and all those things that are making a safety plan. The chances of people going back out and using are significant, right? So how do you handle it when it comes back up? Like making a plan. And from my experience, most of the child protection workers are like impressed by that. They're like, wow, you made this? Like, yeah, because you're thinking about the future and you're trying to eliminate some of those risks, I guess, that are involved, once you are reunified, and you're thinking ahead and you're thinking critically. And those are all important things, I think.
My piece of advice would be to build your community. I just don't think it's natural for people to do these things alone and isolate during these times. I think that's just a recipe for bad outcomes. So really leaning into your supports, even if you have to restart and go to a different meeting or whatever that looks like, go to church, reach out and do your best to be forthcoming about your story. I think as long as you're doing the right things, there's nothing to be ashamed of.
And you might even be surprised with how many people have actually been through it themselves. And it might not be to the same degree. It might have looked different, but everybody's got their stuff, And so I've kind of come to the point in my life where I'm probably overshare a little bit, but just because I'm really comfortable with where I've come from, you never know what kind of connection you're going to make with other people through that, and you might find out you make a really strong relationship, just being vulnerable and honest about where you're at.
You both kind of do this work now, helping people navigate these systems. Can you talk a little bit about what you guys do now?
Yeah, so I work for an organization. My day job is a peer support specialist, also known as a recovery coach. So I work for Northwest Passage, which is nonprofit organization. I work really closely with the St. Croix County government system. So we are pretty much in every single department. So we're in behavioral health, we're in the justice support, we're involved at the jail. And our job is really to support people through the system, whatever that looks like for them. Sometimes it's just meeting with people. Sometimes it's making a plan, about how they're going to get their kids back or how they're going to get off of probation or how they're going to stay sober. It's really up to them. It's self-directed. It's not forced. It's totally, up to them, but it's a different relationship from a social worker or a therapist. I can be vulnerable and I can disclose what I've been through and what worked for me creates a deeper connection with people, and you get some credibility through that too. When you're working with people that are sitting in a jail cell and they're you can tell them hey, I was sitting here and I know what that's like. They seem to trust you a little bit more.
They feel like the system has failed them so many times and they can't trust them. They've been honest at times and they've been punished for it. Well, this is a relationship where we're not responsible for telling their probation officer if they're struggling. We're not going to be the ones to go rat them out to somebody, unless of course they were going to hurt themselves or somebody else. But we're meeting them exactly where they're at a non-judgmental place. And
we don't have an agenda. We're not telling them you need to do this, you need to go to treatment, you need to do. And from my experience, people kind of come to those conclusions themselves, and you don't really have to force them. It's they know a lot of times what they need to do. You're just making it less scary for them, and they come to the decision themselves, which is really, really cool. And they get to see the fruits of that.
So you guys are kind of like the village.
Yeah,
we try to be. Yeah.
I also work at a DV, which is domestic violence and sexual assault crisis shelter. Primarily it works with, it can be men or women that have experienced sexual or domestic violence. And I think a lot of times what I've noticed is women and children that come in there, they're already in fight or flight mode, and their biggest issue was like just trying to find safety initially. Like they were living in that fight or flight, so they're not like that's their main focus, is just to be safe. Once they're in the shelter, they can relax, they can take a deep breath, they can start getting in a routine and not having the primary focus be on being safe, like how they're going to survive the next day. Like that routine is super important, getting them resources. And it can be as simple as mom needs to take a shower. So like, we can go and help with the kids during that time. Answering questions, getting them connected to the family resource center. It can be getting them connected to a new school system. Legal services. We have legal advocates there. We have, help with filling out
rapid rehousing.
So, they don't go back to a place of homelessness. So it's like a smooth transition from being at shelter into their own place. Really, it's just a place. Primarily, I like to look at it as a place for them to just feel at ease and like help the children like feel at ease and like get to be children. So it's called Turning Point, and it's in River Falls. If you're escaping, a situation, you can certainly call the hotline number and talk to somebody. And if, there's not an open bed, we can get you on the waiting list if you qualify, or connect you with other resources in Minnesota and in Wisconsin.
You guys do a lot of great, hard work. How do you like not bring that work home with you? Like, how do you like turn that part of your brain off so you can focus?
That's a really good question. And it's not always easy. And you do take, it's inevitable. There's the rate of burnout in roles like this is really, really high. But and you can maybe relate, our pain tolerance is really, really high. So the way I look at it is I've been through some crap in my life. And I know what I have to do. Being in recovery, we go to meetings, we do a lot of self-help stuff. We're, sitting in circles, we're talking to therapists. We know a lot of this stuff. I think it's when you stop doing those things and you start to drift, and it usually comes out in other areas of my life first. But when you start to feel the burnout, that's when you got to take a step back and maybe take a leave of absence. And I've had to do it before.
I think that's the best part about like working in jobs like these is most of our coworkers and our supervisors all are very aware of like the effect it can have on a person. So they're very consistent about checking in on us. And you talk about it a lot. Self-care is a huge topic, and what are you doing for yourself?
Tell me, what's next for you guys? Do you have plans for the future?
Where my heart's at is I want to keep families together. And if there can be a way to keep women with their kids.
We're actually in the early process of starting a recovery house for women and children. So under school aged. The vision is to kind of have a space where women can come out of treatment and transition back into the community, have like a 4 to 12 months stay. And it's really cool. So we kind of brought in all these professionals and we started a little work group. And through that, I actually just had a builder call me this morning and said, hey, we'd like to design a space like that'll work for what you guys are trying to do. And so it's just really cool. The community is overwhelmingly supportive of this vision. And so more to come on that.
And you have a podcast. Where can people hear your podcast and find out more about what you guys are up to?
So it's the Peer Perspective podcast, and each episode we feature a different guest. Just learn about their healing journey, and it's not all just substance use. A lot of it's mental health, trauma, and so you start to hear kind of the parallels. When we talk about community and how important that is. Everybody needs community. That's a common theme with everyone that I talk to. And their program might look different, and what their what their struggles are might look different, but the healing piece,
that's where the growth happens, where people really thrive, is when they have the support systems in place.
Thank you so much to Samantha and Kyle for being here with us today. This is So St. Paul, a show all about the things and the people and the events that make our city and the surrounding area fabulous. I am Katie DeSell, and I will be back next week, 5 to 5:30 p.m., right here on WFNU Frogtown Community Radio. This episode is in partnership with Minnesota Public Radio and Little Moments Count. If you'd like to know more about Little Moments Count or hear a podcasted version of this episode, visit littlemomentscount.org. Thanks for listening to the Little Moments Count radio podcast in partnership with community radio stations throughout Minnesota. You can find the Little Moments Count radio podcast wherever you get your podcasts and at littlemomentscount.org/podcast.